Barbed Wire Museum in Kansas. There's a World of Rubber in Ohio. There's a Cockroach Hall of Fame in Plano, Texas. There's a tow truck museum and Hall of Fame in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
So these are all referred to on the map.
Huh?
These are all referred to.
Oh yeah,
on the
there's
map.
pictures. I took this. I got a really crummy plastic camera at a pawn shop.
There's a detail.
And took pictures of them. And there's a toilet seat art museum here in San Antonio. There's a toaster museum in Seattle. But there was so anyway, it was obviously big fun to do. And but if you go back to my the one with my sister on it, that was a picture I took when I was 10 years old. And
you talk about this one here.
Yeah, and I hand tinted it, and I took it to a billboard company and blew it up. And so she's about 12 feet tall, and I don't know if you can read that, but it says my sister Gail, 1962, and in parentheses it says actual size. And she really hated it. I don't think she's forgiven me yet for doing that, but.
And this
So
one?
this is a picture my father took at Zion in Utah, Zion National Park. This is the other map.
Yeah, so what's on this map?
Oh, let's see. I don't know. There's a Tupperware Museum in Florida.
Okay,
There's
so
the
it's more
world's
of the
largest
same.
peanut in Georgia. There's a Mary Kay Museum here. There's I don't know. I have a list of
more
them.
of the same.
More of the same. Yeah, the world's largest bottle of ketchup. This was a picture. This is also in the collection of the Denver Art Museum, and it's two pictures that my father took on vacation. And the one on the left is hand tinted, and the one on the right is black and white. And it's a pun in Spanish. It's Sin Colorado means without red coloring. And this is another billboard. This was my father. This was actually a Christmas card. My father was in the harbor detectives of San Pedro Harbor, so he was, and he took this Christmas card picture, and then I added a body outline in the corner there because they used to have to fish out bodies, and I thought, I wondered if they had to trace around it or. This was a billboard size also.
Okay, now we move into what became a fairly extensive body of work.
Yes. This is not my first sign piece, but it's one of them. But I started cutting up signs and finding different signs and making
Do you
statements.
go out looking for signs, or do you just happen to happen on them?
I go out looking for signs, and at first I began by going to sign manufacturing companies always have a boneyard in the back, and so I would buy a lot of their signs from them, and then I started just collecting signs at antique stores and things, and then that evolved into I came upon this process where I actually was a sign painter at one time. So I would see an old sign on a building, and I would paint a new sign, and then I would go up to the owner of the store and trade out the sign. And you know, the hardest part was convincing them
That they needed a new sign.
Yeah, that they were gonna get a new sign for this old sign, and it was always like, well, what's the catch? Why are you doing something like that? And I actually got to the point where I didn't even ask them anymore. I just, a couple of times I just went in the middle of the night and took the old sign down and put the new sign up, because I didn't want to have to deal with it.
And what led you to this particular quote?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question as far as like the quotes. I was, you know,
Were you into Bartlett's Book of Quotations or something?
No, I read a lot of art stuff, and and then I started doing Bartlett's Book of Quotations.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I started out by doing political signs, because after the election I could go and collect all the art supplies
And
that I needed.
we're going to see one of those.
Yeah, that was actually the breakthrough, because I had all this free art material after every election. Plus I was providing a public service by taking down all the signs. So I would cut them up, and I would make these cool, cheap pieces of artwork. And they were all political in nature, but after a while, that kind of ran its course, and I wanted to start getting into some other stuff. This was at Buffalo Bayou Art Park in Houston, and they asked me to do a piece, and so it took me a while to get the signs, and but you could see we're a True Value hardware store. And anyway, this was up for quite a while, and the great thing about it, it was right next to I-45, and it was right downtown. The traffic was stopped every day for hours, so I had thousands of people that drove right past that and could see the work. Yeah, this was probably my first political sign.
And this one actually lives here on loan to Sama. And it has gone through a couple of transformations.
It has a couple. They get weathered. The Human was a Hunan restaurant out on Thousand Oaks, and they had just closed down and were turning into a Thai restaurant, so I was able to get that sign. The Soul was from a Korean restaurant on Wurzbach over by Ritterman Row. The store is from a dollar store. The honey sign is from, both honey signs are from, the first one was a guy on the side of the road up in New Braunfels. I painted him a sign and traded him out for it. And then the second one, I had to go back up and find another honey sign. But
so where'd you find it?
I found it up in the hill country. I had to drive around till I saw somebody making honey, and then I told them I'd make them a new sign if they gave me the old one. This was a piece that I came up with, and I wanted to do something monumental. I had done a lot of things that really probably didn't take very much time, and I'd never done a major project that took up a lot of time and energy, and I wanted to see if I could do it. And so my proposal was I was going to recreate a book in discarded signs, and so I had to pick the right book to do. And I thought of, you know, Ulysses and the Bible and all these lofty tomes, and then I decided I wanted to kind of take the attention away from the book itself. So when I was in high school, we had to read Will and Ariel Durant's Story of Civilization. And it was just, it was, for a while, it's a 10-volume set, and in the 50s, in 60s, it was the definitive historical book. And it was just as boring as could be. It was just tedium. And so I decided that would be a good, and plus I knew I was going to fail. I wanted to do something that I knew I would absolutely fail. And it took me 4 years to do, this is one paragraph. I did 2 paragraphs. It took me 4 years to get all the signs for those 2 paragraphs. And the first volume is 935 pages, and I still had people asking me when I was going to finish it. They said, well, when do you think you'll be done with this project? It's like, it took me 4 years to do 2 paragraphs. So, but anyway, all of these signs have a story to them. And this was shown in Lawndale, which is a very large space in Houston. It's the only space that I've ever been able to show it at, because it's the only space where the 2 paragraphs could fit. So this is the first paragraph. And that's not the second paragraph.
No, that's not the second one.
I guess there was another paragraph attached to it. But this is a public art project I did for the San Antonio Spurs when they built the AT&T. These are basketballs. There's 260 basketballs that I made into an American flag.
How'd you get all those basketballs?
Oh, well, I actually got I couldn't use real basketballs because they were filled with air and they wouldn't last. So I took a couple of toy basketballs and I made molds of them. And then I made them out of resin. So I had to make 260 basketballs out of resin. This was a project I did for the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and this was a park that they they built right by their convention center, and they asked 9 artists from around the country to come up with an art idea for it. So I checked an atlas, and there's like 13 or 14 different places that are called Charlotte, and I got the mileage, and I came up with this signpost.
And this is still standing?
Yes, it's permanent, yeah. I'd actually like to do one for San Antonio if there's any sponsors out there.
Exactly.
There's 14 San Antonios around the world, by the way.
Cool.
So it would be fun for you.
Well, hopefully you will do that.
Yeah, it'll happen.
But this one is in San Antonio.
This is a floor I designed for the parking garage down in St. Mary's Street, and they wanted something kooky, so I came up with these shoes, and they wanted me to identify each floor a different way so people would remember where they parked. And so each floor has a different shoe to it. This is the lobby, this is a wingtip, and they come out of the elevator in sort of a drunken sailor pattern, and then out the door, and they actually turn on the sidewalk and sort of guide people downtown towards the Riverwalk.
So for some of the artists who may be here who've never done public art, how do you get into the public art arena?
Well, it's actually it's kind of like getting a job when you're a kid. It's hard to get a job if you don't have any experience, and you don't get any experience if nobody will get you a job. So I was able to get my foot in the door with a couple of small projects, the one in Manhattan Beach and the one in Denver, and then that developed into the Denver Airport project, which was actually quite a turning point for me. I actually, as a result of that, I had a TV show, I had a travel show on PBS called Sweeney's America, where we went to all these different places, and it only played in the Colorado market, and it's still playing though. But anyway, it was a lot of fun to do. But so once you get a few under your belt and you prove to them that you can do public art, it's easier for you to get a job. Plus, you have to be able to work with materials that will last forever. So if you, for instance,
what about the collaboration aspect with other disciplines? Essentially, you want to.
Well, this one it varies, because this one I dealt with the Venice Terrazzo company, and they were really nice to work with. They couldn't have been better to work with. But I've also worked with people that were hard to work with, and so you have to get along with people, and it's a little bit different when you have to collaborate with somebody. But if somebody says, "Here's our floor, just tell us what you want to do," then that's obviously ideal.
Now, by this time, I assume you're living in San Antonio when you.
Yes,
so
yes. I moved there in 1994.
You moved to San Antonio in 1990. You mean here, not there?
I moved here in 1994 from Denver.
Yes. What brought you here?
Continental Airlines. when they made the new airport, they kicked us all out. I didn't have a job there anymore. They farmed out the baggage handlers, so they said you can move.
Did you have a choice of where you could move?
Yes, I could move anywhere.
What were some of the options?
Well, Houston is our hub.
I mean, why did you choose San Antonio?
Well, actually, we like San Antonio, and my wife has lived here before, and she had 2 sisters here, so we were familiar with it and we liked it. We actually thought of Austin, but at the time the difference in housing prices and the cost of living between Austin and San Antonio was astronomical, and it was so affordable here, and so we ended up here.
Yeah, it's a good place for artists.
Yeah, it is a good place for artists, and I actually when I moved from Denver, I thought I was. I was kind of full of myself, and the first show I saw was Ken Little's show, and then I saw who's the Fisher?
Vernon Fisher?
Vernon Fisher. I saw a Vernon Fisher show, and I went home to my wife and said, I have to practice. These people in Texas, there's some really good artists in Texas.
There are indeed. Okay. Tell us about these routed wood pieces.
Well, this will give you an idea of how an artist works. As a result of my interest in text, I started getting interested in famous people's handwriting, and I researched Abraham Lincoln's, and I researched David Crockett, and so I went over and I wanted to do something, and Abraham Lincoln's, of course, did a million speeches, and all of his stuff is very serious, and I thought, well, you know, he probably makes laundry lists and stuff, and I thought, wouldn't it be unusual if he just kind of jotted down something? And I was thinking that maybe, so I had this whole scenario where he meets my mother-in-law, who's 94 years old, and she and they're at a party, and she's serving him sloppy joes, and he says, I must have the recipe. And so so he writes down this recipe, and I thought of this in the shower, and I started laughing like a maniac. And my wife was in the bathroom, and she says, what is wrong with you? And I said, do you think I could have your mother's sloppy joe recipe? And she says, you are not going to do an artwork making fun of my mother. You are not going to make fun of my mother. I said, no, I'm not. So anyway, this is a very accurate tracing of my mother-in-law's sloppy joe recipe as if written by Abraham Lincoln. And then, of course, David Crockett was a little bit different because he wasn't very literate, and he didn't write a lot of speeches and stuff. But I got samples of his handwriting, and I thought, well, what if he and his friends went to Cancun for a spring break vacation, and he sent a postcard, and and it says, this place is awesome. Went to Carlos and Charlie's, met some chicks from L.A. He was puked on the floor. Dave. So. It's mostly for my own self-amusement that I do these things, but I was very happy with this series. This was along the same. This was a routed piece, and this is kind of a narrative. I think there must be some Terry Allen influence on this because the belts are. You've all seen the belts where the person's name is stamped in the back, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I made an art piece with words on belts? Can you read it? It says, "I'm so lonesome I could cry." So I kind of made it into a little narrative. And my father was in the Navy in Hawaii and Guam at World War II, and so this was a guy named Sailor Jerry who was a very famous tattoo artist in the old Chinatown section. And this is before Ed Hardy, before you see tattoos everywhere. This is a picture of me as a Cub Scout.
Okay, I think that one.
I think it's self-explanatory.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
I'm sure my wife made the comment before I did, but that's a. So in my interest of using different mediums, I was driving home from Dallas, and I saw, of course, we all seen the styrofoam cups spelling out things on the school fences and things. Well, I saw these cups, and they were clearly not styrofoam cups. And so I asked my sister-in-law, who lives across the street, who teaches elementary school, I said, have you ever seen these things? And so she said, oh, yeah, and she got me the name of the guy. So there's this guy named Randall Hunt in Fort Worth who invented these cups that fit perfectly into a chain link fence. And they're, up until then, they're mostly used for advertising and used car lots and schools and things. And I asked him, I said, has anyone ever done anything artsy with these? And he said, no. So I gave him a couple pictures of German Shepherds, and I said, do you think you could pattern these out for me? And so this was my first put-in cup piece. And so Randall and I have a very close relationship now. I've done several pieces of art with him, and he really likes the idea of using the cups for something other than.
And where is this installed?
This was installed at the San Antonio airport, but it really wasn't installed there because even though I had an ID, this was photos. I made these in my studio and took pictures of them in my yard, but they wouldn't allow me to do that at the airport. But this is, you can see right off of 281 where the planes go, you can see the planes taking off and landing. But this was after 2001, and there was no way they were going to let me do it. So I made them, and then I put them in that context.
Another dog.
Another dog. This is of course, interested in language, and so I was thinking, well, what do other countries, what do other languages do when they come upon a dog barking in like comic books or stuff? And so
did you research this?
Yeah, I did. I found a whole series where they had all these different languages and how they say woof woof, and so I had a lot of fun with that one. I also did one with roosters too.
And this one's in the Sama collection.
This one's in the Sama collection.
And
this was an article I read in the newspaper.
Yeah.
Is
that you sitting in that chair there?
No. But that's anyway. It was something you'll see later that I read a lot of newspapers, and so I clipped out the article because I thought it was very interesting, and of course it was right up my alley. So I made the artwork.
And I assume everybody's had a chance to read it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I actually had somebody said, you know, I could read that whole thing except for a couple of words. And I thought, you're missing. I mean, how could you miss a couple of words? I mean, you just kind of scan through it, and it kind of jumps out at you. This is a piece I did with those felt lettering that you get on Letterman's jackets, and this is a photograph of my surfing buddies and me in Husong's Cantina in Ensenada, Mexico. And we're all misbehaving, and this is one of those pieces that just kind of wrote itself. I mean, I didn't make up the expression, but this was a piece I did down in Buenos Aires, and there was this graffiti. Of course, Buenos Aires had that horrible, dirty war where from 1977, anyway, about 30,000 students and union organizers just disappeared, and the government just killed them. And so there's this, and nobody was held responsible for it. So there's this graffiti that's around Buenos Aires that's kind of reminds these people that we know what you did. And amazingly enough, there's an expression that they use down there. It's a Spanish expression, and if they want to say, I don't have a clue or I don't have any idea, they say, me mataste, which means you're killing me. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I combined the two things. This was in an area called La Boca. It's a working class area right by the mouth of the river where everything's painted real colorfully.
Now, this you've exhibited as a photograph, but it's actually more of an installation. Is that correct?
Yes, this was actually recreated up at the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art last summer as an installation. They created a motel room. And the inspiration for it is that these motels are the types of motels that we used to stay in when we went on family vacations. They were just modest little motor inns, and they were usually in the sort of the outskirts of town, and they were what people stayed in. And so I have a real soft spot for them. But when they built the interstate system and they started building gigantic chain motels, these kind of went by the wayside, and they kind of became places where undocumented workers or crack houses or something, they became cheap rundown motels. And this is actually the only piece of art I've ever made that is really not humorous at all. It has no trace of humor, and yet my friends are so conditioned to laugh at it that this is a note that was found on the body of a young man who was crossing back into the United States from Mexico, and he died in the desert. And so this is a story about his loved one who's waiting for them in this motel room, and he says, "My darling, I miss you very much, and I hope to return north soon." And I made it like a motel sign. and I actually did this in a motel here in town, and one of my friends said, well, gee, that doesn't look like a rundown motel. Well, it took us 6 hours to photograph this place. We had to have lights and everything, and you can see that mirror in the background. There was a reflection of one of the lights, and when I went to move it, all these hypodermic needles fell out from behind it. So, so it was, in fact, a very cheap motel room. This is a spoof I did.
And where did you install this?
It was installed at Unit B, and it was actually installed at the lot next to Unit B.
And this is the open